Welcome back, everyone. We'll now start track 2 of the session, and we'll be starting with Smita Ramakrishnan, who's from Rangde. So I think a lot of people would be aware of Rangde, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions around that. So Rangde allows individuals to lend to low-income individuals to set up enterprises or grow them, and we'll hear from Smita about it.
Hi everybody. So I'm here to talk about our journey with Rangde so far, and also about the challenges that a non-profit organization would face in terms of growth, and what we have been trying to do to address some of those challenges. So it all started in the year 2004 when Ram, who's also my husband, and I went to the UK for a brief stint. We were there for about 4 years, and that's when we actually, for the first time, realized what it meant when somebody said India is a developing country. And we lived in a small village called, we lived in a small village called Kidlington, about 4 miles from Oxford. And we always wondered how long it would take for a village in India to reach that stage of development. And we always had this question on how many lifetimes it would take for India to become a developed country. One thing we were sure of when we went to the UK, that we would come back soon and start something in the social space. So this stint in UK was really to save some money so that our parents don't really have to file for bankruptcy, because Ram and I wanted to change the world. So we were very clear, we wanted to make some money, come back to India, and then get started. What it would be, we were not sure. So in a country like India, I'm sure all of us know we are spoiled for choice, right? You can pick up a cause and really dedicate your entire life and still be working towards solving that problem. But there were 4 ideas that we really thought of and we were really passionate about. One of them was child labor. The other one was social media, on how do you bring Indians living in India closer to social problems that India faces. The third one was to provide sustainable doorstep employment to people in rural areas. And the fourth one was microcredit. And we zeroed in on microcredit in the year 2006 when Mohammad Yunus actually won the Nobel Prize for the work that he had done with Grameen Bank. Even then, we were so ignorant. We thought Bangladesh is a poor country. Bangladesh needs microcredit. In India, there's no need for microcredit. But our ignorance was shattered in just a few minutes when we Googled and found that there was actually a huge microfinance industry in India back then. And there were a lot of organizations who had started off as non-profits, who had become for-profits. They were scaling up, attracting a lot of investments. An article that we stumbled upon in Rediff actually got us thinking. This article was written in 2004, but we were reading about it in 2006. And it was about borrowers from a microfinance institution who had committed suicides. And the district collector, as always, had passed an order that borrowers really don't need to go back and repay. And there was a huge furor in the industry. So the thought leaders in the microfinance space had met the district collector and said, this is a sunrise industry and you can't do this. Please take back your ordinance. And he didn't do anything, but at that point, borrowers still went ahead and repaid the loans because of the fear that they may not be able to get access to credit. And when we looked at the interest rates that the borrowers were paying at that point, it hovered anywhere between 40 to 48% APR. And when you looked at reports and all the conversations that were happening about the industry, about the interest rates, everybody said one thing, these are risky loans, the cost of transaction is very high, so you can't really lower the cost at this point. And it was believed that at some point, economies of scale would really act, and then interest rates would actually lower by itself. So nothing was really being done. So we said, on one hand, we're looking at microcredit being a potential tool to help people come out of poverty. On the other hand, we're looking at interest rates that were so exorbitant. So, and when you looked at the repayment rates, it hovered anywhere between 98 to 100%. So we said, there's something that needs to be done about this. So that's when actually Rangde was born. So we started Rangde in 2008 as an internet-based platform that connects individuals like you and me to entrepreneurs living in rural areas. They're mostly underserved communities, many geographies where even microfinance hasn't really worked. There have been pockets of communities where microfinance institutions have felt they're not creditworthy and have left them. So that's really our target audience, and we're trying to reach out to those communities. So this is Ram, he's the other co-founder of Rangde. So what did we do in the last 7 years? So we got a grant. So initially we had put in our own savings to start off Rangde, and then we were really among the fortunate few, because initially, just before Rangde went live, we got a funding of about 20 million rupees from ICICI Foundation. And with that, we have been able to actually disburse loans of about 21 crores so far. Currently it's 26, so what we've been able to do is we've been able to use that grant capital to run Rangde, to see if this is a model that will work, and we've been able to disburse loans of about 210 million. And we've given out about 33,000 loans, and our default rate is around 0.33%. And this is Saraswati Devi, one of our huge success stories and a shining example of the kind of influence that a credit could have in somebody's life. She's from the Bundu block in Jharkhand. Started off with a small kirana store with the Rangde loan, and went on to expand it to a village level service center that would repair mobiles, started selling agri inputs, and then she was also awarded the Anita Sen Memorial Award by the governor of Jharkhand for being such an inspiration. What she started to do was very interesting. She just did not set up her own business, but started to inspire women in the community. The kind of tribal community that she comes from, the women were really not allowed to go out and do something and become financially independent. So the step that Saraswati took was really a huge inspiration to everybody. So what have we done? So 33,000 loans and 7 years. So in a country like India, I think we're not talking about solving the problem at all, right? So what is the scale of the problem? So in the State of the Sector report of the microfinance industry in 2012, these were the official stats. About 7.7% of India's eligible population actually has access to credit, which means that we really have our work cut out, and we had to track how we had to actually plan how we are going to grow next. And typically for an organization, when you're thinking about growth, there are two things that really either further your growth or hamper your growth. One is access to capital. The other thing is access to human capital. And we've been lucky that we have had a fantastic team of people who've been working with us and have been really, really passionate. But what would you do about growth capital? Would we go back to ICICI Foundation again? They'd already supported us with a grant, helped us establish the model, showcase to the world that this is a model that can work and is sustainable. But then what do you do for the next, if you have to scale Rangde, what are we going to do next? So we went back to the drawing board. First thing we did was started reaching out to other foundations. First thing we did was started reaching out to other foundations, asking them for capital, saying that, this is what we have done in the last 7 years. If you support us, we can actually build a strong organization that will help scale Rangde. So the responses that we got from all the foundations, the responses that we got from all the foundations was something that we had not expected, because a lot of foundations and a lot of philanthropic capital that is out there looks at funding impact. They look at how is my money actually going to impact somebody, and if they give 100 rupees, they would like to make sure that all 100 rupees actually goes to fund that project on the ground. They're not interested in funding an organization. They're not interested in looking at how do you build a strong organization that can go and deliver impact. So if somebody wanted to raise 5 crores to, for the next 3 years for their operations, the foundation was really not interested in how do you fund this. But they said, okay, this is our budget. We would probably give you 5 lakh rupees. Show us what you can do with this by making sure that all the money is actually spent on the ground in creating impact. We said, okay, this is clearly not going to work. The next thing we looked at, and was something very startling, is everybody gives what they feel like giving. And it's not about what the organization needs. If you say that I want to set up, just going back to the previous panel discussion, where we were talking about having marketing dollars. So if you want to actually spend money on marketing and go to a foundation and say, fund my marketing team, they would laugh at you. They'll say these are overheads, which the foundation is really not interested in funding, because we want to see what impact it will create. But everybody forgets how this money can actually help in multiplying impact manyfold. So this was something that we realized. So what actually happens is, if you were to plot the impact graph of nonprofits, it would look something like this. The growth is never predictable. It's always dependent on the kind of capital you get. When there's an infusion of funding, impact goes up. Otherwise, everybody says, okay, we can't really look at doing all of this because we don't have the money. So we end up having bonsai nonprofits where you're not really looking at organizations that are strong enough, organizations that are sustainable and are really focused at solving a problem. Because a lot of our time is actually gone in spending, in raising funds for the organization's growth, and not really to look at those innovations that are really important to solve a social problem that we are trying to address. So what was the other route? So we tried the for-profit route. So we started looking at the impact investing space to see, okay, the non-profit space's route of raising growth capital was clearly not working. So will the impact investing space, the for-profit route, work for us? We started talking to a lot of peers who had set up, non-profits, had gone on to convert themselves into for-profit to attract this capital, and what was happening to them. Some of them were actually facing existential questions on why did I actually start this in the first place? Because a lot of conversations that they were having with investors, with board members, was about profit, profitability, and revenue. But the kind of DNA this entrepreneur had was very social, and he was trying to look at the problem. So this conflict between the investors and the entrepreneurs created a lot of crisis within the organizations. And we saw a lot of our friends going through this sort of a crisis, which we clearly didn't want to undergo. And the other thing that, that's been widely promoted now about fortune at the, base of the pyramid, and I really want to disagree with this, because we're not just selling shampoos and soaps to the bottom of the pyramid to actually make money out of them. In some cases, a lot of social enterprises are actually working in areas where markets have failed to deliver. So as social enterprises, aren't we supposed to be creating wealth for the bottom of the pyramid and not really looking at how do you actually make money out of them? So these are some of the questions that we started to face when we were exploring the for-profit route. And of course, the fact that cookie cutter models don't really apply to social enterprises. We're not a McDonald's, we're not a typical for-profit entity that says that what works in Mysore will work very well in Bundelkhand or any other region. So the question about scale and how do you scale is something that the social entrepreneur will really need to look at with a lot of depth, and a lot of thought needs to be given into what is the impact that the scale is going to have and at what cost. So I'm sure this was already mentioned in the previous panel discussion about what happened in the microfinance industry and the huge collateral damage that the communities actually had to undergo. So if a for-profit business, typically an FMCG company or anybody goes broke, or they don't really succeed, nobody cares, because at the end of the day, they're selling a product. But if a social enterprise fails, first of all, failures are not very well accepted in our country. And if a social enterprise fails, the communities actually pay a heavy price for that. So when somebody makes a choice of what kind of capital they want to take and what is their growth plan for the next few years, a social entrepreneur, I think, needs to be really, really careful, and this is what we went through. So what is the solution? So we went back to Mohammed Yunus, the same person who actually inspired us to start Rangde, stumbled upon a book called Creating a World Without Poverty, where he talks very passionately about a model called social business models. It's practiced very largely within the Grameen network. There have been a lot of social businesses that have been set up, but it's not really taken off in other countries. So we looked at the essence of this model and thought, can we actually apply this to Rangde? And I'm happy to say that we have actually applied it, and we have seen some early success there. And I'll quickly run through what it does. The social business actually combines the best of both worlds, the doggedness of the nonprofit, as well as the scale and efficiency of a for-profit world. So in some sense, it perfectly marries the two. And it focuses on one social bottom line, and that is how are we going to solve this problem. And at all points, the entrepreneur and the team is just focused on this and is not looking at profit maximization. He says something very beautifully in his book. He says, if there are two bottom lines that an organization is trying to chase, the financial bottom line and the social bottom line, which is easier to achieve? It's definitely the financial bottom line, and the entrepreneur goes after that, which means the social takes a back seat. So, and in India, because there's already a legal way of doing this, there's a Section 25 company route that one can take, which is essentially a non-loss making and a non-dividend paying business, which means that any profits that the organization makes is really plowed back into the organization to further the cause. We have also done something which people have really laughed at us for, but then we are very proud of it. We've done something called an impact-based valuation in this prospectus that we launched a year ago, where we say that if you're a non-profit and somebody says your valuation is 0 because of the way your financials look, we don't agree with it. So we've created a valuation that is based on impact, and it's really about, and your valuation would increase only if your impact on the ground increases. So at some point, we would like to see social equity investors who will see reports like this on how much of the problem that they were actually trying to address has got solved, which means the social entrepreneur and the investor are not in a dilemma. They're not fighting with each other, but they're really on the same page. So if you're looking at malnutrition and you're looking at 60% of malnourished kids are now over the danger line, and they're really doing well, that is something that the investor would really like to see, and this is what this model hopes to address. So I'll just quickly run through this. 48% malnutrition for kids under the age of 5. These are some of the problems we are looking at. So what India really needs is high impact social entrepreneurs, and there's no dearth for these entrepreneurs. Somebody was talking about young people getting into the space. There's really no dearth for it. What these people need is the right kind of capital that will support them, help them realize that this is a conscious decision they have made, and there's a lot of capital and an ecosystem that will support them. So these are just a few examples. We are looking at Mahesh, who runs Spirulina Foundation. He gives spirulina tablets or candies to kids in primary schools, and that's helping address malnourishment. And there's Chandrasekhar, who runs Vidya Helpline, that gives career counseling and guidance to people in rural areas, mostly kids who go to government schools. So these are just few examples, and there's stellar work happening on the field, and what they need is capital that will actually support them, so that at 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, they have the satisfaction of having built an organization, and they don't have to face existential questions on why did I actually do this in the first place. So at some point, our dream is to really see this, and when we are no more, and probably there's no need for organizations like Rangde to exist, I hope that our epitaph will read something like this. And I'll leave you guys to think about it. There's a short video about Rangde, which will sum up a little about what we do, and then I'm done with mine.